Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 16th chapter in the first book of Samuel. And this juncture in the narrative really marks a pivotal point in which the protagonist of the previous narrative, Samuel, the namesake of the book, the prophet and the final judge of Israel, recedes after this point, and we meet the new protagonist, who is David, a shepherd called to be a king. And the remainder of the first book of Samuel pertains to his pre-monarchical struggles, because Saul was still the anointed monarch of king. And in order to introduce that phenomenon, we need to backtrack a bit, because we earlier mentioned that Samuel was the final judge. Now, prior to this time, Israel was a theocracy, which in the fullest sense of the word means that Yahweh was king. The executive authority was generally vested in what was known as judges. This had more than a judicial context, but a military connotation as well. And the throughout the period of judges, there was cyclical struggles of oppression, apostasy-induced oppression, and prosperity, righteousness-based prosperity. But there wasn't any modicum of stability in that form of government, so the people, noting the efficiency with which their neighboring nations were able to muster armies, for instance, compelled them to beg for a monarchy. And Samuel's two sons were corrupt. They were notoriously so there was no faith in power being vested in them. And after some struggle, the gist of Samuel's argument is that Israel was to be an exceptional nation, not like the other nations. But Yahweh does grant them their wish, and they do send them Saul, who is a rather mediocre man. Now, he was physically impressive and inspiring, but morally he was mediocre, and he eventually succumbs to subpar when he disobeys the commandment of Yahweh dictated to him through Samuel to frankly exterminate the Amalekites, wipe them out wholesale. Women, children, men, and cattle and goats, etc. And this ultimately invites a lot of sneering from our modernist perspective that Yahweh would endorse anything as atrocious as genocide. But we have to understand that his purpose was for Israel to be separated, and there could be no pagan presence in that land. But Saul chooses the path of expedience rather than the path of obedience. He tries to barter their king and to use what leverage he has from having a captive king. And the Samuel frankly tells him that another will come to replace you as the king. But Samuel fades off from the picture at the end of this chapter, the opening verse of which reads, "And Yahweh said to Samuel, How long are you going to mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have seen myself among his sons a king for myself." So there's a lot to digest here. The opening fact is that Saul had failed in the task, which is very experimental. He was their first monarch, their first king, and he failed. And this is a cause for consternation for the one who anointed him, which was Samuel. But Yahweh's telling him not to invest any energy in mourning, because there's action to be done, anointing a worthier king who is identified as a man after his own heart in chapter 13, verse 14, also referenced in Acts 13:22. But the town of Bethlehem is where Jesse dwelled, who was seemingly an ordinary citizen who had a son who was selected in advance by Yahweh, a man after his own heart. And we're going to touch on that, but for now, Bethlehem was the birth town of the Messiah, whose father traveled there. He was a biological descendant of David, and as such, for the tax census that was issued by the Roman emperor, he had to travel to his town. There, his impregnated wife, through the Ruach Kadesh, gave birth, and that was the fulfillment of a prophecy in Micah 5:2. But the final sentence indicates that there's no reason to be concerned because he has found a worthy monarch. And Samuel said, How would I go? When Saul hears it, he shall kill me. And Yahweh said, Take a heifer with you, and say, I have come to slaughter to Yahweh. So Samuel has reasonable fears from, even though his authority anointed Samuel, he's still an untrustworthy king prone to violent compulsions who might kill the prophet who anointed him if in the event that he had information that he anointed another. But Yahweh instructs him to carry forward under the camouflage of a sacrifice, which was a religious rite which priests and prophets would have performed regularly. And you shall invite Jesse to the slaughtering. Then let me show you what to do. And you shall anoint for me the one I say to you. And Samuel did what Yahweh said, and went to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, saying, Do you come in peace? So there was an awesome, terrible presence which accompanied the prophet of Elohim wherever he went in Israel. And the citizens of Bethlehem has cause for consternation by his very presence. And because prophets just as often issue proclamations of doom as they do of blessings and peace. So they really wanted to know, are you going to do some positive activity, or are you going to issue a curse against us? So they had that mystery, and he answers them. And he said, In peace, I have come to sacrifice to Yahweh. Sanctify yourselves, and you shall come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and invited them to the slaughtery. So he has his eye on Jesse because all that he knows is what Yahweh has told him, which is that one of his sons, he doesn't say which one yet, is going to be the newly anointed king, Saul's replacement. And it came to be, when they came, and he saw Eliab, and thought, The anointed of Yahweh is indeed before him. Eliab was the eldest of Jesse's son, and according to the principle of primogeniture, which reigned mostly uncontested throughout antiquity, was that the inheritance was vested in the firstborn, but David actually laid an inheritance, so he wasn't inheriting anything from Jesse, save his genetic material, but he was called to be a king of no royal blood, but he was really a progenitor king of sorts, and his line would rule until the capture of Jerusalem in 586 BM. But the answer that Yahweh provides after what is in retrospect an overly confident presumption on Samuel's behalf. But Yahweh said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For not as men sees, for man looks at the eyes, but Yahweh looks at the heart. So therein we read that there is a difference in approach in execution of judgment. Man bases his judgment on what he can see, and to some extent our judicial system is empirically evidence-based, and rightly so, but the judgment that really matters, the character within us, cannot be attained by the eyes. Ergo, we must exercise spiritual senses, the eyes of faith, 2 Corinthians 5:7. And Samuel was not immune to walking by faith, which is succumbing to the ways of the world. So, but he's gently rebuked by Yahweh to say that your judgment is false. He may be the most physically impressive among the bunch, but I'm looking for a man after my own heart, which the eyes of sight cannot see. Yahweh can penetrate the inner man and discern the thoughts and intents of his heart, and in David he found a man after his own heart. And we're going to touch on that later. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither has Yahweh chosen this one. Abinadab was the second eldest, and so he's just going in a line of succession, one after the other. Logically prior, the elders are logically prior, because in his estimation, that's the way of the world, but the way of Yahweh is not always the way of the world. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, Neither has Yahweh chosen this one. So that's a repetitive process. It's a presentation and a rejection. And Samuel said to Jesse, Are these all the young men? And he said, There remains yet the youngest, and see, he is tending the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, Send and bring him, for we do not turn round till he comes here. So he's in business because he knows that Yahweh has told him that one of the sons of Jesse is going to be his anointed, yet he doesn't impress upon him the obvious impression that it is any of the candidates thus far presented, but there is a younger one who is attending to the sheep, and he wasn't deemed important enough in the estimation of Jesse to present him to this prophet. And Samuel said to, and he sent and brought him in, and he was tanned, with bright eyes, and good looking. And Yahweh said, Arise, anoint him, for this is the one. So even though he's not yet a physically impressive creature, he does have physically impressive qualities. He's pleasant to look at, and Saul was identified as the tallest and handsomest man of Israel. That would have been, by the worldly man standards for kingship, because the humans judge by the eyes and not the heart. And Samuel took the horn and of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of Yahweh came upon David from that day and onwards. And Samuel arose and went to Ramah. So Samuel's departing from the scene. We don't hear of him much after this verse, but even more significant in the verse itself is that the oil is symbolic of the Ruach Kodesh, in that it is essentially a water-like liquid element which moves accordingly, inexorably, and the Ruach of the Spirit of Yahweh would have been thought of as an extension of the monotheistic deity. The old Jews under the Old Covenant had no conception or official doctrine of the distinct divine entity of the Ruach Kodesh, which became universal to believers in the new dispensation and the current dispensation. But throughout the Old Covenant, the Ruach Kodesh would have been specially assigned and selected according to Yahweh's needs. Now they are at our beck and call in prayer, and inasmuch as we are sincere and aligned with the will of the Almighty, He will accompany us in our journey. And the Spirit of Yahweh turned aside from Saul, and an evil spirit from Yahweh troubled him. So the signal departure is the spirit which Saul had been blessed with, we read of in earlier occasions, had departed from him and left him and abandoned him, and an evil spirit had occupied what space it used did. From that we can reasonably infer that he was inflicted with a demon possession. And the servants of Saul said to him, Look now, an evil spirit from Elohim is troubling you. So it was obvious to everyone in the immediate vicinity. They could see that he was overcome by a demon or an evil spirit. It was nothing he could hide, try as he might. Please let our master command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is a skilled player on the lyre. And it shall be that when the evil spirit from Elohim is upon you, that he shall play with his hands, and you be well. So they're petitioning him according to contemporaneous protocol, where they couldn't go do something at his behalf unless it was at his behest. So they could not solicit a player and bring him in without warning him in advance or gaining permission to do that. That's just the order of operation in most monarchies. And Saul said to his servants, Please get me a man that plays well, and bring him to me. So he's willing to do anything to get rid of this evil, troubling spirit, which should have never came on him had he not failed morally. But he seeks everything but the source. So to seek music from, if you do find yourself tempted or troubled by demons, to seek relief in music will be a fleeting and hollow relief. We really owe it to ourselves to return to the source, the superior power under whom the demonic dwindles. And one of the servants answered and said, Look, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who knows how to play, a brave one, and a man of battle, and skilled in words, and a handsome man, and Yahweh is with him. So David, it was no understatement to suggest he was a polymath, a man of all trades, a Renaissance man, and some of the items in which he excelled were in warfare activity. He was a brilliant tactician and a fierce warrior, and skilled in words. He lent his expressions to Yahweh, which are really the most heartfelt expressions. There's really no rival like it in the book of Psalms. So he contributed spiritually as well as geopolitically to his nation state as well as spiritually to posterity. And he was a handsome man, so he was physically impressive to look at. So he really had it all the qualities and making of a leader. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son, David, who is with the sheep." So he identifies him by name, unbeknownst to him that he is his anointed replacement. He's initially drawn to him by providence in order to gain the first-hand sight of the king in operation. Having that proximity, he can see how to rule and, more importantly, how not to rule. And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, and a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them by his son David to Saul. So Jesse is complying. He's sending his son at the request to honor the request of a king. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. Now, the he in that sentence means Saul, but Saul's love was really fleeting for David. He loved him only inasmuch as he secured him from his enemies and stilled the raging voice in his head from the evil spirit. But David's love for for Saul was something real. It was a manifestation of the New Testament principle of loving thy enemies. He had him in his hands, and he refused to kill Yahweh's anointed. So even though David had a respecting for the anointing, at least as much, not to violently discard one who had the anointing but did not respect its ramifications. And David came to Saul and stood before him. Saul therefore sent to Jesse, saying, "Please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my eyes." So even though he doesn't know that he's his anointed successor, he takes him into a position of trust and confidence and inner exposure to the operation of a monarchical government. And he's summoning him at his request. So he's politely petitioning the father to release his son to his custody. And it came to be, whenever the spirit from Elohim was upon Saul, that David would take a lyre and play it with his hands. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the evil spirit would leave him. So David was performing the function of expelling demons from a man who would have been otherwise permanently demoned visited in the absence of the music, because so exuding with the grace of Yahweh would have that music have been that the demons within him would have withered. And that concludes today's lesson. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.